If he dies, every single one of you dies with him." The growl shook the stained glass windows of the nursery. Alpha King Valeric didn't sound like a king. He sounded like a wounded animal cornered in a trap. He stood in the center of the room, his chest heaving, his black hair wild and matted with sweat. In his massive arms, he held a bundle of white silk that was far too small and far too quiet. His son, the heir, the price he had paid for his wife's life. 3 healers stood against the wall, trembling. The head physician, a man who had served 3 generations of kings, was on his knees, shaking. "Sire, please," the physician stammered. "We have tried everything. The wet nurses, he rejects them. The formula, he cannot keep it down. His heart is failing. It is the grief, sire. The pup feels the loss of the Luna. He is fading." "Fix him," Valeric roared. His eyes flashed a terrifying, unstable gold. "Do not tell me he is fading. He is all I have left. Make him eat." The baby let out a sound that wasn't a cry. It was a weak, gasping wheeze, the sound of a flame flickering out. Valeric looked down at the tiny face, blue-tinged and skeletal. Panic, cold and sharp as a knife, sliced through his rage. He had conquered kingdoms. He had killed alphas with his bare hands, but he couldn't fight this. He couldn't fight silence. He turned to the guards at the door. "Bring me another wet nurse. Bring me every Omega in the city if you have to. I don't care if you drag them from their beds." "Sire," the guard captain hesitated. "We have brought everyone. There is no one left." Valeric snarled, clutching the baby tighter, too tight. The baby whimpered in pain. "Give him to me." The voice came from the shadows near the fireplace. It was quiet, rough, and completely out of place in the Royal Nursery. Valeric spun around, his teeth bared. "Who spoke?" A figure stepped out from behind the pile of discarded linens. It was a girl. No, a woman, but she looked like a scullery rat. She wore a gray servant's dress stained with soot and scrub water. Her hair was hidden under a ragged kerchief. She held a bucket of dirty water in one hand and a scrub brush in the other. She was a cleaner. The invisible staff meant to scrub the floors while the nobles slept. "I said," the girl repeated, her voice shaking but her eyes steady, "give him to me. You are crushing him." The room went dead silent. The guards reached for their swords. The physician looked horrified. A floor scrubber giving orders to the Alpha King? It was a death sentence. Valeric stared at her. He should have killed her for the insolence. His wolf demanded it. But through the haze of his madness, he saw her eyes. They weren't looking at him. They were fixed on the baby, and they were filled with a fierce, terrifying focus. "You dare?" Valeric stepped toward her, his shadow engulfing her. "You are a cleaner. Do not speak to me." "He's hungry," she said, dropping her bucket. Dirty water sloshed onto the expensive rug. She didn't care. She walked right up to the Alpha King, a man 7 feet of muscle and rage, and held out her dirty hands. "He doesn't want a wet nurse who smells like fear. He smells your panic, Alpha. You're terrifying him." Valeric froze. "I am his father. Right now you're a predator holding prey," she snapped. "Give him to me." It was the audacity that did it, or maybe it was the fact that the baby had stopped wheezing and was now listening. Valeric handed her the child. He didn't mean to. It was instinct. He passed the fragile bundle into her rough, red, work-worn hands. The girl, Elara, took the baby. She didn't curtsy. She didn't tremble. She turned her back on the King of the North and walked to the rocking chair by the fire. She sat down, arranging the silks with expert, gentle movements. She brought the baby to her chest. She wasn't lactating. She wasn't a wet nurse. She simply laid him skin to skin against the warmth of her neck, right over her pulse. She began to hum, a low, thrumming sound deep in her throat. Valeric watched, his hand on his dagger ready to strike if she hurt him. The baby took a breath, a real, deep breath. Elara reached into her apron pocket. She pulled out a small, clean cloth soaked in something. She pressed it to the baby's lips. "Honey and warm water," she whispered to the child. "Just a taste. Just to remind you that sweet things exist." The baby's tongue darted out. He tasted the cloth. Then, miraculously, he latched onto Elara's finger and began to suckle. "There," Elara whispered, rocking him. "See, you're okay. You're safe." The tension in the room snapped. The physician slumped against the wall. The guards lowered their weapons. Valeric stood frozen. He watched the scrub maid rocking his dying son. He watched color slowly return to the infant's cheeks. He watched the way the girl's dirty hand cupped the back of the royal heir's head with a tenderness that looked like worship. And then he smelled it. Through the soot, through the old soap, through the metallic tang of blood and sickness, he smelled peace. It hit his alpha senses like a physical blow, a scent of rain-washed stone and wild mint. It was the most calming thing he had ever smelled. His wolf, which had been howling with grief for weeks, suddenly went quiet. It lay down. It watched her. Valeric took a step forward. The floorboards creaked. Elara didn't look up. "He's sleeping, Alpha. Don't wake him." Valeric stopped. He looked at his hands that had destroyed armies, and then at hers. "What is your name?" he asked. His voice was no longer a growl. It was a rough, broken whisper. "Elara, cleaning staff, 3rd shift." "Elara." He tested the name. It felt heavy on his tongue. "You saved him." "He saved himself," she murmured, her cheek resting on the baby's head. "He just needed to know someone was listening." Valeric dismissed the room with a sharp jerk of his head. "Everyone out, now!" The physicians and guards scrambled to leave, sensing the shift in the air. The heavy doors clicked shut, leaving the king alone with the cleaner. Valeric walked to the chair. He knelt. It was an impossible sight. The Alpha King on his knees beside a servant girl's chair. But he wasn't kneeling to her. He was kneeling to get closer to his son. He looked at the baby's sleeping face. It was the first time Cassian had looked peaceful since he was born. "You have magic," Valeric accused softly. "No magic, sire. Just patience." He looked up at her face. Under the grime, she was young, maybe 20. Her eyes were gray, like the sky before snow. She looked exhausted, malnourished, and terrified. But she held the baby as if she were a queen shielding her kingdom. "You are not cleaning floors anymore, Elara." She flinched. "Sire, please. I need the wages. My sister—" "You will have wages," Valeric said. He reached out, his large hand hovering near the baby, near her chest. He didn't touch, but the heat of his hand radiated toward her. "You will move into the nursery suite tonight. You will not scrub. You will not carry buckets. Your only job, your only duty, is him." Elara looked at him then, really looked at him. She saw the dark circles under his eyes, the grief etched into the lines of his mouth. She saw a man who was just as terrified as the baby he couldn't comfort. "I don't know how to be a royal nanny," she whispered. "I'm just a girl from the village." "You are the only one he chose," Valeric said. "And my wolf—" He paused, shocking himself with the admission. "My wolf is quiet when you are near." He stood up, towering over her again, but the threat was gone. "Stay," he commanded. But it sounded like a plea. Elara looked down at the warm bundle in her arms. She looked at the powerful, broken man standing guard over them. "I'll stay," she said. The first night in the Royal Nursery was a siege, not against an army, but against silence. Elara sat in the plush velvet rocking chair, her back aching from a tension she couldn't release. She had washed the soot from her skin in a basin made of porcelain that cost more than her family's entire cottage. She wore a nightgown of heavy cream linen, provided by a terrified laundry maid who hadn't dared to look her in the eye. In her arms, Prince Cassian slept. It was a fragile, miraculous thing. Every breath he took was a victory, but Elara couldn't sleep. Because 5 feet away, the Alpha King was watching her. Valeric hadn't left. He had dismissed the guards, locked the heavy oak doors with a silver key, and then dragged a heavy iron chair from the corner to place it directly in front of the crib. He sat there, still in his boots and sweat-stained tunic, his massive arms crossed over his chest, staring. He didn't blink. His golden eyes were fixed on Elara and the child with an intensity that made the air feel heavy. He looked like a statue carved from grief and violence. "Sire," Elara whispered, after 2 hours of this oppressive silence, "you should rest. There are guest chambers nearby. I will watch him." "No," Valeric rumbled. His voice was rough, like gravel grinding together. "I closed my eyes once, and my wife died. I will not close them again." Elara tightened her hold on the baby. "If you collapse from exhaustion, you cannot protect him." "I do not collapse." It was a lie. She could see the tremors in his hands. She could smell the exhaustion rolling off him, a scent like burnt wood and stale adrenaline. He was running on fumes and alpha instinct. Elara stood up. It was a risky move. Valeric's eyes snapped to her face, his pupils dilating. "Where are you going?" "To put him down," she said calmly. "He needs to learn to sleep in his crib, and you need to stop looming over him like a gargoyle." She walked past the King of the North. She felt the heat of his body as she passed, a furnace of suppressed power. She laid Cassian in the crib, tucking the blankets around him with practiced efficiency. She placed a hand on his chest, waiting until his breathing settled into a deep rhythm. Then she turned to Valeric. "Sit in the rocking chair," she ordered. Valeric blinked, looking at her as if she had spoken in a foreign tongue. "Excuse me?" "The iron chair is uncomfortable. You're stiff. You're making the baby anxious with your tension." She pointed to the velvet chair she had vacated. "Sit. It reclines. If you won't leave the room, at least be comfortable." Valeric stared at her. He was used to generals and lords cowering before him. He was not used to a girl with scrub-reddened hands telling him where to sit. Slowly, warily, he stood up. He moved to the rocking chair and sat, The wood groaned under his immense weight. He looked ridiculous, a warrior king in a nursery chair, but his shoulders dropped an inch. "You are bold for a cleaner," he muttered. "I'm not a cleaner anymore," she reminded him softly. "I'm the only thing keeping your son alive. That buys me some latitude, doesn't it?" "Perhaps." Valeric leaned his head back against the velvet. He watched her through half-lidded eyes. "Why did you do it? Why risk my wrath to save him?" Elara moved to the window seat, pulling her knees to her chest. She looked out at the snow falling over the obsidian citadel. "Because I know what it sounds like when no one is coming for you." Valeric went still. "You are an orphan. Since I was 6, my parents died in the grain riots. My sister and I, we learned to be quiet. We learned to be small." She looked at him. "Your son was screaming for help, but he was too weak to make a sound. I heard him. I couldn't leave him." Valeric looked at the crib. "I didn't hear him. I was right there, and I didn't hear him. Grief is loud, sire. It drowns out everything else." Valeric closed his eyes. A single tear, hot and traitorous, leaked from the corner of his eye and tracked through the grime on his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. "Sing," he commanded, softly. "Sire?" "The song. The one you hummed earlier. Sing it. The silence. The silence is too loud." Elara hesitated. Then, her voice trembling slightly, she began to sing. It was a folk song from the valleys, a lullaby about the moon watching over the mountain wolves. Her voice was clear and low, filling the room with a gentle, weaving melody. As she sang, she watched the king. The tension slowly bled out of his frame. His breathing deepened. His hand, which had been gripping the armrest like a weapon, relaxed. For the first time in 3 weeks, the Alpha King slept. And Elara sat watch over the 2 most powerful males in the kingdom, wondering how she had gone from invisible to essential in the span of a single heartbeat. Weeks passed. The nursery became a world unto itself, a sealed ecosystem of warmth and quiet routines amidst the cold stone of the castle. Cassian thrived. Under Elara's care, he gained weight. His skin turned a healthy pink. He began to smile, a lopsided, gummy expression that made Elara's heart stutter every time she saw it. Valeric was there every night. It became a ritual. He would rule the kingdom by day, ruthless, efficient, cold, and at sundown he would retreat to the nursery. He would remove his crown, his heavy cloak, and his weapons, and he would sit in the rocking chair. He rarely spoke. He just watched. He watched Elara bathe the prince. He watched her pace the floor when Cassian had colic. He watched her feed him the formula she had specially mixed with goat's milk and herbs. He was learning her. Elara could feel his gaze like a physical touch. He was memorizing the way she moved, the way she hummed, the way she tucked a strand of light brown hair behind her ear. It was intimate, terrifyingly intimate. They were playing house in the ruins of his tragedy, but the outside world could not be locked out forever. One afternoon, Elara was alone. Valeric was in a war council meeting that had dragged on for hours. She was sitting on the rug, playing a game with Cassian's toes, making him gurgle with laughter. The door opened. It wasn't the king. A woman swept into the room. She was tall, beautiful, and sharp as cut glass. She wore a gown of deep emerald velvet, and her red hair was piled high in an intricate style that spoke of hours of labor. She carried the scent of expensive perfume, roses and musk, that instantly made Cassian sneeze. Lady Isolde, the daughter of the Duke of the Western Reach. And, according to the kitchen gossip Elara had once listened to, the woman who had expected to be queen before Valeric chose Anya. Isolde stopped in the center of the room, her eyes sweeping over the nursery with disdain. Her gaze landed on Elara, sitting on the floor. "So," Isolde said, her voice smooth and poisonous, "the rumors are true. The king has installed a peasant in the royal tower." Elara scrambled to her feet, scooping Cassian up instinctively. She didn't bow. She didn't know why, but bowing felt wrong while she held the air. "I am the prince's nurse, my lady." "Nurse?" Isolde laughed. It was a brittle sound. She stepped closer, her skirts rustling. "You are a Stain girl. Do you think we don't know? Do you think the court is blind? The king spends his nights here, with you." Elara felt a flush rise to her cheeks. "He spends his nights with his son." "Oh, please. Valeric is a man. A grieving man is vulnerable. And you—" Isolde looked Elara up and down, sneering at her simple gray dress. "You are opportunistic vermin. You seized a moment of weakness to claw your way out of the scullery." Isolde reached out. Her nails were long and painted dark red. She reached for Cassian. "Give him to me." It is time the prince was cared for by someone of breeding. I have brought my own wet nurse from the west. We will not have the air raised smelling of floor wax. Elara stepped back, clutching Cassian tighter. The baby began to whimper, sensing the tension. The king gave me charge of him, Elara said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I take orders only from him. The king is not here, Isolde hissed. Her eyes flashed. She was a beta wolf, and she was letting her dominance bleed into the air. I am the highest-ranking female in this pack now that Anya is dead. You will obey me, servant. Hand him over. She lunged. It wasn't an attack exactly, but she grabbed Elara's arm, digging her nails in, trying to wrench the baby away. No! Elara shouted. She shoved Isolde. It was a frantic, clumsy push, but Elara had spent years scrubbing stone floors. She was stronger than she looked. Isolde stumbled back, tripping on the hem of her gown. She didn't fall, but she looked shocked. You touched me, Isolde whispered, her face twisting into ugliness. A servant touched a noble. She raised her hand, her nails extending into claws. I will flay the skin from your face. Elara turned her back, curling around Cassian to shield him. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the blow. A low, thunderous growl shook the room. Isolde froze. Standing in the open doorway was Valeric. He wasn't human, not entirely. His eyes were fully gold, the pupils slits. His teeth were bared in a snarl that exposed his canines. He didn't look like a king. He looked like a monster who had just found an intruder in his den. Valeric, Isolde gasped, dropping her hand. She attacked me. This peasant assaulted me. Valeric moved. He crossed the room so fast he was a blur. He didn't go to Isolde. He went to Elara. He grabbed Elara by the shoulder and spun her around, his eyes scanning her frantically. He saw the red crescent marks on her arm where Isolde's nails had dug in. He let out a sound that was half roar, half whine. He touched the marks with a trembling finger. Then he turned to Isolde. You drew blood, Valeric said. His voice was terrifyingly quiet. In my nursery, from my son's protector. She was insolent, Isolde cried, backing away. I was trying to help. She is unfit. Look at her, Valeric. She is a cleaner. She will make the boy soft. I brought a proper nurse. Get out! Valeric, please, the council agrees with me. We cannot have... Get out! The roar shattered a glass vase on the mantelpiece. Isolde shrieked and fled, hiking up her skirts and running as if the hounds of hell were snapping at her heels. Valeric slammed the door shut and locked it. He leaned his forehead against the wood, breathing heavily, fighting to leash his wolf. His hands were shaking. Sire? Elara whispered. He turned. He looked wild, dangerous. Did she hurt him? No. Cassian is fine. Did she hurt you? He walked back to her. He took her arm, lifting it to the light. The nail marks were bleeding sluggishly. Valeric stared at the blood. His nostrils flared. He lifted her arm. For a second, Elara thought he was going to hit her. Instead, he lowered his head. He licked the wound. Elara gasped. His tongue was hot, rough, sending a shockwave of sensation straight to her core. It was a primal, possessive gesture, a wolf cleaning its mate's wounds. He pulled back, his eyes blazing gold. He realized what he had done. He realized he had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Valeric stepped back, looking horrified. I apologize. My wolf, he is close to the surface. He smells your blood and he thinks... He trailed off. He couldn't say it. He couldn't say what his wolf thought. He thinks I belong to him, Elara finished softly. Valeric looked at her. The air between them crackled. Do you? He asked. It was the most dangerous question he had ever asked. I have expanded the narrative to allow for more character development and political tension, ensuring the story reaches that 90-minute mark. Elara looked at the king who had just terrified a duchess to protect a maid. She looked at the man who had tasted her blood and found it sweet. I belong to Cassian, she said, her voice trembling but her chin high. And you belong to the kingdom. We both have our duties, sire. Valeric let out a harsh breath, a sound like a bellows forcing air through a dying fire. He stepped back, the golden light in his eyes fading back to a stormy human gray. He ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly exhausted. Duties, he muttered. Yes, we have duties. He walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered grounds where the guards were patrolling. But duties change, Elara, and alliances shift. You should know, Isolde will not take this lightly. She will not simply go home and weep. I know, Elara whispered. She will tell everyone. She will say I seduced you. She will say I am unfit. Let her speak, Valeric said, his back to her. Let them all speak. Words are wind, but actions have teeth. He turned back to her. You cannot stay in the servants' quarters anymore, not even for meals. It is too dangerous. Isolde has allies in the kitchens, in the laundry. Then where do I go? You stay here, Valeric commanded. Meals will be brought to you. You do not leave this suite without my personal guard. If you need fresh air, use the private balcony. If you need anything at all, you ask me." "I am a prisoner, then." "You are a treasure," Valeric corrected roughly, "and treasures must be guarded until the dragon is slain." The next week was a lesson in isolation and intimacy. True to his word, Valeric locked down the nursery tower. Guards were posted at every interval. Food was tasted before it entered the room. Elara was cut off from the world, from the gossip, from the sneers of the court. But she was not alone. Valeric spent every free moment in the nursery. He brought his work with him. He sat at a small table near the fire, reviewing maps and treaties while Elara rocked Cassian. Sometimes he would read the reports aloud, asking her opinion on grain shipments or border disputes. "Why ask me?" she said one evening as she folded Cassian's tiny laundry. "I am uneducated, sire. I don't know strategy." "You know people," Valeric replied, dipping his quill in ink. "You knew my son was hungry when the physicians thought he was dying. You knew I was terrifying him when I thought I was protecting him. Politics is just people, Elara, usually hungry, terrified people." She smiled at that. It was the first time she had really smiled at him, and Valeric stopped writing to watch it happen. It changed her face, lighting up her gray eyes, making her look younger, softer. "The southern villages are hungry," Elara said, looking at the map. "If you tax their grain now, they will starve in the winter. If they starve, they will rebel. Not out of hate, but out of desperation." Valeric looked at the map. He looked at her. Then he crossed out the tax order. "You are right," he grunted. "We will open the royal granaries instead." It was a quiet revolution, the cleaner girl advising the king. But the tension in the castle was building. Elara could feel it vibrating through the stone walls. Isolde had not left the capital. She was holding court in the lower city, hosting tea parties and dinners, spreading poison with every smile. The rumors grew wilder, that Elara was a witch, that she was feeding the prince potions, that she had orchestrated the late queen's death. Valeric tried to shield her from it, but he couldn't shield her from his own nature. One night, the moon was full. The pull, the biological imperative of the alpha to hunt and run, was strong. Valeric was pacing the nursery like a caged tiger. His skin was hot, his temper fraying at the slightest noise. Cassian was fussy, sensing his father's agitation. Elara walked the floor with him, singing softly, but the baby wouldn't settle. "Give him to me," Valeric growled. "You are too tense," Elara said calmly, not stopping her pacing. "I said give him to me." The shout cracked through the room. Cassian began to wail. Elara stopped. She turned to the king. He was shaking, his hands clenched into fists, fighting the transformation. The wolf wanted out. The wolf wanted to run. "You need to shift," Elara said quietly. "I cannot leave you," Valeric rasped, sweat beading on his forehead. "If I leave the tower, if I go to the woods, who protects you?" "You cannot protect us if you shatter," she said. She walked over to him. He flinched, afraid he might hurt her, but she didn't stop until she was standing right in front of him. "Shift here." Valeric stared at her. "Here? In the nursery? I am a monster, Elara. I am 8 feet of killing instinct. I will terrify the boy. I will terrify you." "Cassian needs to know his father," Elara said firmly. "All of his father, and I am not afraid of wolves." She stepped back, giving him space. She held Cassian close, covering his ears gently. "Do it, Valeric. Let him out." Valeric looked at her with an agonizing mixture of gratitude and fear. Then he threw his head back and let go. The sound of bones cracking was sickeningly loud in the quiet room. His clothes tore. Fur burst from his skin, black as midnight. He dropped to all fours, his body expanding, reshaping, growing until a massive timber wolf stood in the center of the royal nursery. He was huge. His shoulder came up to Elara's chest. His claws gouged the expensive rugs. His teeth were the length of daggers. He shook his massive head, a spray of saliva flying. He let out a huffing breath that rattled the window panes. Then he turned his glowing golden eyes on Elara. This was the test. This was the moment most women screamed. Anya had hated his wolf form. She had tolerated it for ceremonial runs, but she had never let the beast near her in private. Elara didn't scream. She didn't run. She lowered herself to her knees. She held Cassian out just a little. "Look, little prince," she whispered to the baby. "Look at your papa. Isn't he beautiful?" The wolf froze. He lowered his massive head, inching forward. He sniffed the baby, his hot breath ruffling the white blanket. Cassian stopped crying. He stared at the giant black nose with wide, curious eyes. He reached out a tiny, chubby hand and grabbed a fistful of black fur. Valeric let out a low, rumbling whine. He didn't pull away. He froze, letting the infant hold him. Then he looked at Elara. He nudged her shoulder with his wet nose, asking. Elara buried her hand in the thick ruff of his neck. "We're here," she whispered. "We aren't going anywhere." The wolf sighed, a heavy, contented sound. and flopped down on the rug. He curled his massive body around Elara and the baby, creating a living wall of fur and heat. They stayed like that for hours, the King of the North in his truest form, guarding his pack. Elara fell asleep leaning against his flank, her hand tangled in his fur. When she woke the next morning, Valeric was human again. He was dressed in fresh trousers. Kneeling by the fire, adding a log to the embers, he looked rested for the first time in months. He turned when she stirred. His eyes were clear. "You stayed," he said. It was a statement of wonder. "I told you I would." "You slept against a monster." "I slept against a protector," she corrected. Valeric stood up. He walked over to her, looking down with an intensity that made her breath catch. "The council has summoned me," he said abruptly. "They are demanding I address the rumors. They want me to choose a wife." Elara felt the cold creep back in. The bubble was popping. "I see." "They have organized a winter ball," Valeric continued. "In 3 days, every eligible noblewoman will be there. Isolde will be there." "You must go," Elara said, looking down at her hands. "You must choose. The kingdom needs a queen." "The kingdom needs a queen," Valeric agreed. "And Cassian needs a mother." He reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small object wrapped in velvet. "This belonged to my mother," he said. "She was a woman of the people before my father claimed her. She hated the heavy crowns. She preferred this." He opened the cloth. Inside was a hair comb made of silver, shaped like a sprig of winter berries. It wasn't flashy. It was delicate, understated, and priceless. "Wear this," Valeric said. "Sire, I cannot go to the ball. I am a servant. I have no gown." "You will go," Valeric said, his voice brooking no argument. "I have already arranged it. You will not enter as a servant. You will not enter as a guest." He placed the comb in her hand. His fingers closed over hers. "You will enter as my choice, and if they sneer, if they whisper, if they look at you with anything less than reverence, I will remind them that I am a wolf, and they are merely sheep." "Valeric," she whispered, terrified. This is a declaration of war against the nobility." "Good," he smiled, and it was the wolf's smile, sharp and dangerous. "I have been at peace too long. I think it is time I reminded them whose teeth are sharpest." He kissed her forehead, a chaste, burning touch. "Prepare yourself, Elara. The nursery was the shelter. The ballroom is the hunt." The night of the winter ball arrived with a storm. Snow lashed against the high windows of the citadel, as if the heavens themselves were warning of the conflict to come. Inside the nursery, Elara stood before a tall mirror, her hands trembling as she smoothed the silk of her gown. Valeric had not sent a seamstress. He had sent the royal tailor, a man who usually crafted coronation robes. The dress he had created was not the frothy pastel confection of a debutante. It was a weapon. It was a deep midnight blue velvet, the color of the sky just before true dark. It was cut simply but structured to perfection, with long sleeves and a high neck that lent her an air of unapproachable dignity. But the back was open, draped with fine silver chains that glimmered against her pale skin like starlight. She fastened the silver berry comb into her braided hair. She looked at her reflection. The frightened, cleaner girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who looked like she held secrets capable of toppling empires. "You look," a deep voice said from the doorway, "like a storm warning." Elara turned. Valeric leaned against the doorframe. He was breathtaking. He wore formal black leathers with silver embroidery, a heavy velvet cape draped over one shoulder. His crown, a simple band of white gold, rested on his dark hair. But it was his eyes that held her. They were burning with a fierce, possessive pride. "Are you ready?" he asked, offering his arm. "No," she admitted, "but I am coming anyway. That is why I chose you." They walked down the long corridor together. The guards snapped to attention as they passed, their eyes widening at the sight of the king with the nanny on his arm. The music from the great hall swelled as they approached the double doors. The herald, a man named Finch, who had announced kings for 40 years, looked at Elara with confusion. He opened his mouth to ask for her title. "Elara," Valeric said simply. "Just Elara." Finch banged his staff on the floor. The doors swung open. "His Majesty, King Valeric, and Elara." The silence that followed was heavier than the stone ceiling. 500 heads turned. The cream of the nobility, dressed in their finest, froze. Isolde stood near the front, wearing a gown of crimson silk that clashed violently with her flushed face. Her eyes narrowed to slits as she took in Elara's appearance. Valeric did not hesitate. He led Elara down the grand staircase. Every step was a statement. "This is who I walk with. This is who I value." They reached the floor. The crowd parted, creating a wide circle around them. My lords, my ladies, Valeric's voice boomed, cutting through the whispers. You have asked me to choose a queen. You have asked me to secure the line of succession. He turned to Elara, taking both her hands in his. I present to you the woman who saved the heir when your healers failed. I present the woman who advises me on grain shipments when your lords advise me on taxes. I present the only person in this kingdom who has seen my wolf and offered it comfort instead of fear. She is a servant, Isolde shouted, unable to contain herself. She stepped forward, her face twisted. She is a floor scrubber. You insult us, Valeric. You insult the memory of Queen Anya. The crowd murmured in agreement. The tension spiked. Guards shifted their grips on their spears. Valeric turned slowly to face Isolde. His expression was terrifyingly calm. You speak of insults, Lady Isolde? He asked softly. Let us speak of insults. Let us speak of the day you entered my son's nursery and drew blood from his protector. Isolde went pale. That was a misunderstanding. Was it? Valeric stepped closer. Was it a misunderstanding when you paid the kitchen staff to spoil the milk sent to the nursery? Was it a misunderstanding when you bribed the laundry maids to spread rumors of witchcraft? Gasps rippled through the hall. I have the receipts, Isolde, Valeric said, pulling a sheaf of parchment from his belt. I have the confessions. You tried to starve my son to force me to accept your wet nurse. You tried to destroy this woman because you knew before I did, that she was better than you. He threw the parchments at her feet. Guards, he commanded. Take Lady Isolde to the tower. She will await trial for treason and attempted regicide. No, Isolde shrieked as two burly guards seized her arms. You can't. My father will burn this city. You are choosing a peasant over a duchess. You are mad. I am in love, Valeric roared, silencing the room. And I am the king. My choice is law. Isolde was dragged away, screaming. The doors slammed shut behind her. Valeric turned back to Elara. She was trembling, but she hadn't moved. She hadn't run. Valeric, she whispered, you just arrested a duchess. I would arrest the gods if they threatened you, he replied. He knelt, right there in the center of the ballroom, in front of the entire court. He pulled a ring from his pocket. It wasn't the heavy, cursed ruby ring Anya had worn. It was new, a band of white gold set with a rare, pale moonstone. Elara, he said, his voice rough with emotion, I cannot offer you a peaceful life. I am a king of winter and war. My enemies are many. My temper is foul, but my heart is yours. It has been yours since you slapped my hand away to hold my son. He looked up at her, his golden eyes shining with unshed tears. Will you take this burden? Will you take this crown? Will you take me? Elara looked at the ring. She looked at the nobles, stunned into silence. She looked at the man kneeling in the velvet. She remembered the nights in the nursery, the way he held his son, the way he let her lead him when he was blind with grief. It's not a burden, she said clearly, her voice ringing out in the silent hall. It's a pack. She held out her hand. Valeric slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. He stood up and kissed her. It wasn't a polite, courtly peck. It was a devouring kiss, a claiming mark stamped on her soul in front of witnesses. The ballroom erupted. Some cheered, mostly the soldiers and the younger lords who respected strength. Some stayed silent, plotting, but it didn't matter. The deed was done. The king had chosen. The wedding took place 3 days later in the godswood behind the castle. It was simple, performed under the falling snow, but the peace was not destined to last. 6 months later, the Southern Coalition, Isolde's father and his allies, marched on the Obsidian Citadel. They came with 5,000 men, demanding the release of the Duchess and the abdication of the peasant queen. Valeric rode out to meet them. He took his army, his generals, and his rage. Elara stayed behind, but she didn't hide in the nursery. She stood on the battlements, wearing a heavy fur cloak over her gown, Cassian strapped too, her chest in a carrier she had sewn herself. She watched the armies collide in the valley below. She watched the smoke rise. My queen, the captain of the guard said nervously, you should be in the crypts. It is safer. My husband is fighting for my right to exist, Elara said, her eyes fixed on the black banner of the king fluttering in the chaos. I will not hide in a hole while he bleeds for me. The battle was brutal. The coalition outnumbered the royal army 2-1. Valeric was a demon on the battlefield, his greatsword cleaving through ranks of soldiers, but they were being pushed back toward the gates. Then, something changed. A horn blew from the east. Elara squinted against the snow. A new army was emerging from the tree line. They weren't soldiers. They were ragged motley armed with pitchforks, hunting bows, and old axes. It was the common folk, thousands of them, farmers, millers, blacksmiths, villagers from the lands Elara had saved from starvation by opening the granaries. They had heard the queen was threatened. They had come. For Elara, the cry went up, rolling across the valley like thunder. For the Bread Queen! They smashed into the flank of the coalition army. They didn't have training, but they had numbers, and they had fury. They broke the enemy lines. Valeric, seeing the tide turn, rallied his men, pushed them back for the north. The coalition broke. Isolde's father was captured. The rebellion was crushed before the sun set. That night, Valeric limped back into the castle. He was battered, bruised, his armor dented. He found Elara in the great hall, organizing the healers to tend to the wounded villagers. He stopped in the doorway, leaning on his sword. He watched her moving among the people, touching foreheads, bandaging arms, giving orders with quiet authority. She wasn't just the nanny anymore. She wasn't just his wife. She was the queen, and the people loved her. Elara sensed him. She turned, her face lighting up. She ran to him, ignoring protocol, and threw her arms around his bloodied armor. "You're alive," she sobbed into his neck. "I told you," he rasped, dropping his sword to hold her. "I don't collapse." He looked over her head at the crowded hall, at the commoners eating at his tables, at the nobles who were forced to sit beside them. The rigid hierarchy of his world had been shattered, replaced by something messier, stronger, and warmer. "You did this," he whispered to her. "You saved them. They came for you." "They came for us," she corrected. Later that night, back in the sanctuary of the nursery, Valeric sat in the rocking chair. Cassian was asleep in the crib, clutching a wooden wolf toy. Elara sat on the rug, resting her head against Valeric's knee. "Is it over?" she asked sleepily. "The war is over," Valeric said, stroking her hair. "The work is just beginning. We have a kingdom to rebuild, we have a son to raise, and we have a nursery to redecorate," she murmured. "This gray is depressing." Valeric chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through her. "Whatever you want, my queen. Painted pink, painted gold, as long as you are in it." He leaned down and kissed the top of her head. "Sleep now, Elara. The wolf is watching." And for the first time in her life, Elara slept without fear, knowing that when she woke, the dream would still be there, solid and warm and real.